thank you all of our panelists and everybody who is tuning in through Facebook and other means for spending a little bit of your Mother's Day afternoon with us. This is an incredibly important topic, and we appreciate you being a part of the dialogue. This is the second in a series of discussions that the Ebony Horsewoman Incorporated is hosting on the impacts of COVID-19 and at-risk youth. We are talking about at-risk youth everywhere, but specifically in Hartford. And so a little bit about me. My name is Heather Lawson. I'm born and raised in Hartford, Connecticut. This is one of the reasons why this topic is so near and dear to my heart. I have the privilege of being the chairwoman of the board of directors for the Ebony Horsewomen, and I have about 20 years worth of experience in public health. I have a Juris Doctorate and a master's degree in public health from the George Washington University Law School and School of Public Health. And I'm currently working on a doctorate in public health leadership. So that's a little bit about me. That's about the biggest role that I'm going to play in this conversation, because we are privileged to have with us some of the foremost, some of the preeminent minds on this topic. And so I really want to sort of be a fly on the wall to what I'm sure will be a great conversation, and let us all hear from our experts. But before we move forward, I also want to give a shout out to the Ebony Horsewomen Incorporated and our CEO and founder, Ms. Patricia E, for her leadership in developing this series and spearheading this topic for discussion for the city of Hartford and the state of Connecticut. I don't like doing these without talking a little bit about the people who are behind the scenes who make all this stuff happen. We have, as most nonprofits, and then basically everyone has, really pared down our operations, but we don't have the ability to close our, to shutter our operations completely or to close our doors. And so we have our own set of essential staff who go in every single day to make sure that all of our animals, especially our four-legged therapists, our horses, are well taken care of, well fed, and still getting love. And so I really want to give a shout out to Dominique Bourgeois, Hillary Rhule, Chaz Carroll, and Frederick Wright, who are on the ground, our boots on the ground, most loved and most essential workers during this COVID-19 pandemic. I also want to give a huge shout out to Miss Tiffany Jones, who got all the technology together to make this happen. And without her, we really could not have pulled it together. Before we begin, I want to state that each of us participating in the discussion is participating in our own personal capacities. The remarks that we make represent our personal views and not any organization or entity through which we are employed or otherwise affiliated. This discussion is being broadcast on Facebook Live, and then afterward, it'll also be posted to the Ebony Horsewomen YouTube page. So we really hope that you go back and visit it, take a look at some of the questions that may be coming in while we're talking, and also share the link that comes out with your contacts and stakeholders. We really think that this is a valuable conversation that should be continued. So without further ado, I want to introduce everyone to our esteemed panelists. We are missing Cynthia Jennings, but she's on her way, so I want to introduce her now. Cynthia Jennings is an environmental and civil rights attorney. She served as a councilwoman in the city of Hartford for 6 years. One of her major initiatives on city council was to establish a municipal solid waste task force to protect Hartford residents from the health risks of 70 towns, which is almost half of Connecticut. And she protected Hartford from other towns continuing to burn their garbage in Hartford. Cynthia Jennings passed a resolution by the Hartford City Council to oppose the building of a gas pipeline through the reservoir where Hartford residents obtain their drinking water. She also served as a presenter at a national environmental conference in Boston following her trip to Flint, Michigan to assess the Flint water crisis. Jennings spent years working with Dr. Mark Mitchell, Sharon Lewis, the late Larry Charles, and many other environmental leaders, including the late Gladys Ellis, former director of Hartford Seniors in Action, to protect children and seniors in Hartford from the devastating health effects of environmental racism. Next, we have Dr. Rachel Cezar-Martínez, Dr. Rachel was born in Chicago, Illinois, and raised most of her life in a small town named Minden, Michigan. She's currently serving as the Director of Live Animal Imports for the United States Department of Agriculture in the DC area. She served in the federal government for the last 15 years, to include as a supervisory and field veterinary medical officer, as well as the Horse Protection National Coordinator. Dr. Cezar-Martínez received her doctorate of veterinary medicine in 2002 from Michigan State University and Public Policy Leadership certification from American University in 2012. Prior to beginning her career in the federal government in 2004, Dr. Cezar-Martínez interned at equine veterinarian hospitals in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, and Lexington, Kentucky. She's also served as a public health officer in the Air National Guard in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. She currently holds her major officer status in the inactive ready reserves. We also have Dr. Gary Rhule, internist. Dr. Gary Rhule, MD and PH, is a public health practitioner, healthcare management consultant, former emergency room physician, and former director of health and human services in Hartford, Connecticut. He has expertise in federal and state public health policies and programs that address public health and human service needs. To learn about Dr. Rhule, please visit www.garyrhule with an H, RHULE.com. You can also find him on Twitter at Gary Rhule, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook, Gary.Rhule.1. Dr. Albert DiChiara, from the University of Hartford. He's the Director of Criminal Justice Programs and Associate Professor in Sociology and Criminal Justice. He has worked on projects including the Drug Elimination Program in Hartford's Northeast neighborhood, the Safe Schools Health Schools Project, and Student and Family Assistance, where he piloted a critical thinking program for students who were suspended or expelled, the Hartford Public Schools Anti-Gang Task Force, and the Weed and Seed Crime Prevention Programs in Northeast Hartford and Upper Albany Clay Arsenal. He's worked with a number of private agencies whose mission is active involvement with at-risk criminal or ex-convict populations. He has evaluated crime prevention, truancy, and other behavior change-oriented programs in a number of metropolitan cities and towns. We also have Councilwoman Wildaliz Bermudez, who was elected to the Hartford City Council in November of 2015 and is now on her second term as a Hartford Working Families Party City Council member. She's fought around a variety of issues ranging from police accountability, resources for immigrant communities, and refugee protections. In 2019, Trinity College honored her as one of the 50 for 50 Next 50, and in 2018, she was named one of Connecticut Magazine's 40 Under 40 for her work in the community. She's a graduate of the Hartford Public School System with a Trinity undergrad degree and a master's degree in environmental science. She lives in Hartford's Asylum Hill neighborhood with her husband and baby. And I have a little bit of Roxanne's new bio. I do apologize. We have Roxanne Ellis-Denby, who is a licensed clinical social worker. She's been a member of the National Association of Black Social Workers, which is NASB, since 2004, and currently serves as president of her local chapter, the Greater Hartford Association of Black Social Workers. Roxanne served as National Vice President of the National Association of Black Social Workers from 2014 and 2018. And I am so embarrassed to say that I don't have the first part of your bio, Roxanne, but what I can definitely say is that Roxanne and her company provides the clinical social work interventions for Ebony Horsewomen's programming with at-risk youth for equine assisted psychotherapy. And so we'll make sure that everyone's bio is included along with the link that we post later on. Ms. Jennings, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I was running into some technical difficulties.
I definitely understand. We did your, we introduced you already and read your bio.
Okay.
So we are ready to go if you guys are.
I am.
We're ready. Excellent. Dr. Rhule, last time we talked, I always try to come to you first for the medical aspects of things to kind of get our underpinning together in terms of understanding the disease, understanding how it works, understanding how people contract the disease, and why is it that Black and Brown communities but the numbers actually show that though we are a smaller fraction of the society at large, that we are, a predominant fraction of those who are infected, affected, impacted, and who contract the disease. So coming to you first is always super helpful, but now I'd like to talk to you about, last time we talked, we understood how the virus works. Now I want to talk to you about the issue of testing and contract tracing in Black and Brown communities, which are, as we know, the communities that are most affected. It seems as if, we're hit one blow after the other. The first phase is that we're the ones that are affected and infected. Now we're not getting tested. Now we're not getting counted. The information, that the data that is coming out of state hospital systems is coming just people. They're not being identified. The cases are not being identified by race. And that is a big problem when we talk about where we need to do contact tracing and so forth. Can you talk to us about this new phase of this disease, which involves testing, tracing, and accurate reporting, and how that factors in to further health equity issues for Black and Brown communities?
So that's a great question. I guess the good news of the news is that there is actually more testing available now. And so the city of Hartford a week ago established a phone number where you can call, you can actually get a ride, and they'll facilitate you getting the test done. Okay. The test is done, it's free. It doesn't matter if you're insured or uninsured. It doesn't matter if you're documented or undocumented. So really anyone can call that number, and it's 860-757-9731. 757-9311, and to ask to get a test done. They'll arrange the ride and you can actually have the test done. The other good news, I guess, of all that we've just talked about is the fact that the facilities in Hartford, both Hartford Hospital, St. Francis, Charter Oak Health Center, and probably CHS will also have access to those sites. But if you call that number I just gave you, they will arrange a ride for you. So it doesn't matter, it's free, you can get the test done. And specifically for us, that's really, really important, right? Because as you mentioned, we are at higher risk for many reasons, housing, the work that we do, and we really need to know who, if we're exposed, if we've contracted the virus, and really what to do. So that's the great news of all of that, I think. And I'll kind of just stop there for now to say right now, it's great to get the test, call that number, they'll get you a ride, free, doesn't matter if you're insured, you can get your test done. And that will help you decide for your family really what you need to be doing in terms of preventing other folks from being infected and or if you need to return to work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is great news. One of the problems that we had, I think, earlier on with the disastrous rollout of the testing in terms of it being very slow, and then also there being enough tests, is that people were told not to get tested unless you were showing symptoms. Is that still the case? Do you have to be showing symptoms in order to be tested?
No, so in the ideal setting, really, you really want persons who have symptoms to be tested. But really the way this is set up now is anyone really can get a test by just calling. And so that's a good thing. The other thing I wanted to mention too is that you don't need a doctor's order. So a week ago, the commissioner for DPH said, anybody can get a test. You don't need a doctor's order. An NP, no one really can get a test if you need one.
Excellent. And
regardless.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, regardless of really your symptoms. But ideally, if you're feeling sick, those are the persons really initially who should get one. But if you call a number, really anyone can get a test at this point.
Excellent. And one of the other questions that I know a lot of our listeners have had is about making sure that testing is fully accessible with respect to language access, and also accessible with respect to disability access. I think some of the problems that were occurring with some of the earlier testing site locations is that they were drive up. well, what happens if you don't drive, or if you are a person with a disability, that where driving up to a testing site is a problem, is an issue for you. And we also have, you know, a lot of Spanish speaking community members in and around the greater Hartford area who language may not be, which English may not be their first language. So we need to also ensure that people who are hearing impaired, people who have limited English proficiency, are also able to get access to these testing sites, and also the information about how to call, how to be tested, and where the locations are. Do you have any information about the availability of, or rather the accessibility of these sites, and the information about where these sites are located?
So the great thing about the city of Hartford and the number that they have is that typically when you call, it asks you if you need a ride, if you need specific accommodation, whether it's language or any type of disability that you have. So that's a great, so I would use that site actually, that telephone number, to access it that way. I mean, most sites will probably also have language for Spanish interpreters to help you. If it's another language, they still have access to a language line, but typically English, Spanish would be fine. And then being able to get that ride, you would actually tell them if you need any type of accommodations, whether you're in a wheelchair or something else.
Okay, fantastic. Attorney Jennings, you know, I think people are really fond these days. I may have even said it myself earlier in this, you know, earlier in the pandemic, that this disease, this virus really knows no color. It knows no socioeconomic status. It knows no boundaries, really. It affects all people. And I think that's sort of a misstatement. You know, the longer and deeper I think about this, and the, you know, the more numbers that come out, and the more that I hear from my own population, my own community members, I know that that's not true. This virus may attack everybody, can have the possibility of attacking everybody, but it does attack certain populations differently. We know that. The facts support that, data support that. But one of the things that we know in terms of a why that is has a lot to do with environmental justice issues. We know that decades worth of divestment in communities, urban communities, particularly Black and Brown communities, put those community members in a higher risk category for having a worse outcome if they do contract the disease. I think a few days ago was World Asthma Day, and we know for a fact that Latinos and Blacks have higher rates of asthma because of poor air quality, pollution, all sorts of things, than other communities. We also know, and I know that you had some work to do with clean water issues. You've worked with Flint, Michigan, and their water issues, the famous, you know, and horrible water issues that they've had there. And you've worked on some issues in Hartford as well to make sure that our populations have access to clean water and cleaner air with the landfill. Can you talk a bit about why this environmental justice issue is so important for us to name, call out, and point to when we talk about Black and Brown communities and the impact that COVID-19 has on them?
Okay, thank you so much for that. One of the things that I would talk about would have to do with where we site our incineration. In Connecticut, 70 towns out of 169, almost half of the towns in Connecticut are actually cited, are actually burn their garbage in Hartford. They bring in trucks, 300 to 400 trucks a day that spew all kinds of carcinogens into the air. And we have a higher asthma rate in Black and Brown communities among Black and Brown children because of the air quality in Hartford that's brought about by half the state dumping their garbage and burning their garbage in Hartford. So we have to deal with the issue of incineration and how we dispose of our garbage. Whether every town in the state should be responsible for their own garbage or if there should be another system set up. We're now in the process of working with the Department of Environmental Protection to determine whether or not we're going to build a new trash facility to burn garbage in Hartford again, which places all Black and Brown children again at risk. So we're talking about a situation when Dr. Mark Mitchell first came in as director of health. He identified, I believe, 43% of the children that he checked for camp physicals had asthma.
Right.
And it's an astronomical rate. And if 43% of people anywhere were born blind, they do something about it. But the issue is whether or not we're going to allow them to build another trash incinerator here that will increase the asthma rates and consequently put our children at a higher risk of contracting not just corona, but anything else that comes along. So it decreases our life expectancy. Our seniors are dying at a higher rate in Hartford than anywhere else in the state, in accordance with one of the last report I read from the state health department. So we have to deal with how we're, what kind of environmentally risky facilities we are placing and supporting in our cities. And we have to make sure that the people that are involved and engaged in the siting of these facilities be people who live around the facilities.
That's right. And how is that legal? I'm sorry, as an attorney, my brain just turns on to say, how is it that 70 other cities in the state of Connecticut can bring their trash to Hartford to burn around us?
A lot of these decisions are made at the legislative level, so they make the law, so they make it legal. But Dr. Mitchell worked with the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice several years ago, of which I was a board member for many years as well. And one of the things that he did was implemented something called an environmental justice law in Connecticut. We're one of the few states that has an environmental justice law. We need to make sure it's enforced. We need to make sure that everyone who's involved in any issues that affect our environment are speaking to us as well.
Mm-hmm. How do people get involved in the issue? Because as you said, people who live in these communities, people who are affected by these actions need to have a seat at the table. They need to be a part of the decision making, particularly as more work is being done to determine where the next incineration site is going to be placed. How do people, regular citizens in Hartford, around Hartford, get involved for it to be on the right side of this fight?
Well, initially the way we got involved was through the department, it was then the Department of Environmental Protection, and they were holding hearings about whether or not they were going to expand the landfill or not. Mm-hmm. And so we got involved in that issue. We made so much noise that the Justice Department came in because I guess they thought there might be a war in Hartford. And they became very concerned about the fact that so many people were so angry about this landfill and how badly it smelled and just destroy the quality of life in our communities. But the bottom line is that contact the state of Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection or Energy and Environmental Protection and make sure that you find out who do you talk to about where they're going to be citing garbage. Get your community organizations that you're involved in on the schedule for when they're going to be holding these meetings and these webinars now, and make sure that people show up and make sure that people who are concerned about the health of their children know that this is an issue. Go to the Hartford City Council and talk to them about it. They have a task force that when I was on council, I established a task force on solid waste management, because they were getting ready to build another environmental facility to burn garbage in Hartford, which will keep it here for another 30 or 40 years. Yeah. And believe me, they had already made a decision to do that. And they initially we were saying, go find some other sites outside of the city. Mm-hmm. and see if you could. No one would accept this garbage, this amount of garbage. So we get dumped on with 70 towns dump their garbage in Hartford and feel like it's okay to just pay a fee, because the bottom line is that they're not giving it to the city of Hartford anyway. They're making tremendous millions of dollars off incineration, and the city of Hartford got $1.5 million, I believe, in taxes on that, and that's nowhere near what it's cost us in terms of health, loss of school days, illnesses, senior citizens' illnesses. So we have to be on top of it and aware. And it only takes a couple of people to do it. I think we started out with maybe 1 or 2 people.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is the long-term impacts on health that poor air quality has. I mean, we all talk about the current impacts and so forth. But I know that studies, Dr. Rhule could talk to this later, but I know that studies have found evidence of air pollution in the placenta of women who have given birth. And so it affects not only people who are out and in it, it affects life that hasn't even been born yet. Councilwoman Bermudez, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk to you about the role of local law enforcement and also city officials in terms of the impact of COVID on our youth. There was some data that was released last week by the New York Police Department, which showed that 81% of coronavirus enforcement summonses were issued to Black and Latino residents. And so, there's this thing about criminalizing the victims, and that happens so often in Black and Brown communities. And now here we are again, where I saw video from Florida, spring breakers out laying all over beaches and so forth. I'd like to know how many summonses were issued there, as opposed to, those that are issued to Black and Brown communities. In one of my master's degree program classes, I also remember a class about healthcare communication and making sure that you get the communication about health out to the populations where they are and where they can most accept the communication. So on the one hand, I'm wondering, have we even done enough to educate populations who are out in the community, urban communities, about how to maintain social distancing, what it means, how to protect themselves? We know that there's not enough PPE, right? And so and we also know that they live in very congested areas with sometimes limited access to clean water supplies and so forth to constantly wash the hands. And then also, I'm not certain, early on there was a lot of misinformation distributed about COVID-19 being a hoax. So I'm not even sure that the true health education message has landed. So you've got that on one hand, but then on the other hand, we've got this maybe over enforcement of various laws that disproportionately affect and further criminalize Black and Brown people. How do we square those two? What role does city government and or local law enforcement play in making sure that we're not further traumatizing the traumatized, further victimizing the victims?
That's right. Local government plays a very important role in all of this, because a lot of what's happening at the federal level and legislations that are being passed, at the rate that we're going, it's really up to local and state government to figure out what we're going to implement and how we're going to tackle this. And while at the federal level, yes, there are certain measures that are being placed, but at the same time, it's at the end of the day, the bottom line is it's up to our local government, and also with the help of the state, to figure out what we want to do here in the state of Connecticut. And so the news that came out in New York is a prime example of, the same stop and frisk laws that had developed a long time ago, but now again being hyper targeted in focusing, unfortunately, that the NYPD focusing on giving tickets to Black and Brown people in higher numbers, exorbitant numbers compared to others who were not wearing their masks, and or for example, for congregating, coming together at parks, and for all sorts of things like that. Just measures that either the Governor Cuomo had put in place to try to keep social distancing, the practice going, and that were being, the community was, maybe they had no access to masks. And so there's also that element that has to be taken into consideration, because that is a reality that we're faced with right now. The community, a lot don't have access to masks. Sure, you can try to make your own. My mom she can sew, so I'm lucky and thankful to have her. I'm wearing my mask as I'm out here outside today. But at the local level, bringing it back to Hartford, these are things that we certainly and the community has to vouch for, to say we don't want to have high number of young people being stopped by our own police department. We don't want what happened in New York to be the example here in our own communities that, and especially in the cities that are predominantly Black and brown communities. And so I think it's important that the message be, yes, we have to continue to communicate with our young people in our community in general about how we can practice social distancing, what can we do to protect ourselves, and certainly wearing masks. Any kind of mask that you can get a hold of is important to try to safeguard ourselves. But also we also need the other part of it, and the government component is to make sure that we push policies and measures that that are helpful, that are not detrimental, that are helpful to our young people. So instead of saying, okay, for every we have a lot of parks in Hartford, and so for every park where the Hartford Police Department is called to and officers are called to, and young people are congregating, well, what is our response going to be? Are we going to say we're going to ticket them? Are we going to say we're going to, what kind of, we have to, and we can't all of a sudden react in the same way that we've seen and again, I'm going to cite New York as a prime example. We can't rely on saying we're going to penalize people for not conforming. And by the way, those people tend to be Black and brown communities who may not have access to these supplies. So we really have to work with one another, and we have to work with communicating with our young people and our population in general, but also providing them with the necessary tools.
Yeah, and I love that answer in terms of owning that this is our issue, owning that these are our kids, and owning that we have to be a part of the solution. I'm wondering if there are any grassroots organizations or advocacy organizations that can partner with local law enforcement to come up with a set of standards or a set of recommendations for how this education going forward is done. We've got summer coming up, right? And as states are beginning to open, they're not opening up the full floodgates. They're going to be incremental stages of opening. And so as much as, kids love the spring, we've all been cooped up. Kids love the summer, kids love warmth. They want to get out into that park space, which I want to loop back around to Attorney Jennings to talk about adequate green space in Hartford, which is another issue. But they're going to want to get out into whatever spaces they are, right? So how do we get ahead of this issue? We know summer is coming. Are there any opportunities for community advocates, grassroots organizations, and local law enforcement, maybe led by the council, to come together?
Yeah, I think absolutely there is. One prime example of stuff that's being done at the grassroots level and at the community level. So for example, in terms of pushing forth legislation that impacts Black and brown communities. So the ACLU, I'm not sure how many watching are familiar with this, but the ACLU, they defeated a motion to dismiss by the state of Connecticut. The ACLU basically put together a lawsuit because of the number of people that were reaching out to them and saying, look, I have loved ones that are incarcerated right now, and they have no access to testing. Some of them, their charges were, either their charges were minor and or in other cases, they had specific health problems that would really be detrimental to them had they remained incarcerated. And so they put together this lawsuit, and then unfortunately it got dismissed at the state court, but it won at the federal court. And so what it means right now is that the ACLU was able to get testing for folks who are incarcerated in the state of Connecticut. So there's about 10,700 people who are incarcerated. Unfortunately, 80% of them are Black and brown. And so groups like the ACLU, but also, and that's looking at it from the lens of at the state level, but also local groups should be pushing for a legislation to really figure out what it is that we want to see and how it directly impacts our own communities. Another area that we can talk about with folks and young people congregating is, now it's nice weather outside and it's going to be warmer weather, is whether or not the community wants to start using drones. So that opens up
Right.
a whole nother can.
Yeah.
So but we really have to be proactive, and as a community, Blue Hill Civic Association is a great example, and so many others, community groups at the grassroots level, to try to come up with solutions so that it's not top down, so that it's the community saying, no, we want to take this other measure, instead of reprimanding our youth and throwing them in jail for not having things like masks, or having them issued tickets on them. So there's a lot that can be done.
Excellent. Because also, many of our youth are already criminal justice involved one way or another. And having, additional tickets or summonses or what have you is not helping them in the long run. Dr. DiChiara, it kind of feels like for our youth, particularly Black and brown young men, that is damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? So we were just talking about the requirement to wear masks, and our councilwoman is sitting there with a really beautiful looking bandana around her face, around her neck, that she can put up on her face to protect her from the virus. But we also know that in America, Black and brown men don't do really well with face coverings. They don't get to wear hoodies like other communities do. They don't get to wear bandanas around their faces like other communities do. And we've already seen reports of Black men being kicked out of Walmarts for coming in with face masks, brown men, Hispanic men being tackled to the ground because they're wearing a face mask. We're asking them to be safe. How do we talk to our youth about how to be safe by wearing the face mask and the face coverings, and how to stay alive?
I don't know. The face mask is a relatively low-level form of deviance, wearing it or not wearing it. And I think it's, to a large extent, it's mostly informal social controls that are holding people to that trend. But it's the new stop and frisk to a large extent. It's an opening of a door. So if an officer sees 10 people hanging around and has no reason to ask them what they're doing, the mask not being there gives you an opportunity to say, hey, what's going on here, guys? And 21st century, and when there's teenagers, there's weed. And so it's very simple to take it to the next level if they want. We're talking about individuals in Hartford who are surveilled probably more than any group in Connecticut. There are cameras, there are drones, there are people watching everywhere. There's an informal youth control network that extends from the churches to the schools to the families to everyone's worried about kids getting out of control. And the mask adds one more dimension to living in that. Mm-hmm. This is being experienced by kids in ways that I don't understand, because I haven't spent a lot of time talking to them. But I think about the wearing of the mask might take on the same relevance as wearing baggy pants, which has its origins in the prison system where the clothes were ill-fitting, and what was a badge of stigma became a badge of manhood later on. So to what extent will young kids play around with the mask and cause problems? Probably some will. There's some irresponsible young people out there. Mostly very young kids are going to make mistakes like that. There are some police officers who are going to intimidate these kids by using the mask as leverage to intrude on their privacy, which we do all the time. And this is going to have an effect on them in terms of trauma. I think we don't know the way these kids are suffering. And we know that there are risk factors associated with crime, and stress like this is one of them. Mm-hmm. And we know that boys tend to externalize that stress in the forms of deviance, and girls will internalize that stress in the form of some kind of self-hate, some kind or another, depression. So we should expect to see that some of this will express itself in the form of higher levels of crime. And this is going to be a problem in the future, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. And and what I'm most worried about is I'm worried about the kids who actually follow the the guidance, the CDC guidance, the recommendations to wear a mask. You know, again, wearing a mask, wearing any sort of face covering is a stigma. There's a stigma attached to that. Our Black and brown boys get criminalized a lot of times just by existing, just by walking. Sometimes they're in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. Sometimes they're just being normal teenagers, but you add to that another layer.
Yeah, I'm just wearing a hoodie. I mean,
Just
wearing a hoodie is normal behavior. I have a couple of pairs myself, and I use them for that purpose, to cover my head. But I have privileges as an old white guy that some people don't share. But yeah, wearing the mask has a lot of symbolism attached to it in our culture, you know. And I think the way it's, this is my casual observation, the way it's working out is that conservative, right-wing people are saying, I'm not wearing that mask because you're a baby. If you wear that mask, you're a sissy. And the intellectuals and the urban people are wearing masks. And so we're getting a divide that's going in an interesting direction. I don't know what it means, but the fact that the political right has adopted not wearing the mask as kind of like one of their major foundations is interesting.
Mm-hmm. And you've worked a lot with gang communities and other organizations trying to make inroads into gang communities. So you understand, sort of talking to youth and youth culture, how might interested parties look to communicate effectively with young people to try and explain the real intense dichotomy around wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, the obvious public health benefits to wearing a mask and the obvious personal safety detriments to wearing a mask. How do we have Black, brown boys to send out into the world. How do we talk to them about how to navigate this really, really troubling space?
Well, we can't do it in school right now because the schools are closed, and we know that there's a large portion of Hartford students who have computers, so they're now being, abandoned in their education because they don't have a computer. So you can't do it in the schools. You have to find, organic, natural leaders in the community. You have to find people who have some authority. Sometimes these are the more colorful people in the neighborhood, but just because they may have some colorful features to their lives and rambunctious natures doesn't mean that they don't belong in the community and don't want the community to do well. My experience with the gangs in Hartford from the 90s on has always been that they cared about the community, that they did the best they could to regulate their criminal behaviors in a way that wasn't externalized even more than it was externalized. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that these are monsters we're talking about. We're talking about ordinary people. So you could find leadership there. Mm-hmm. I think also you have to look at prevention of deviance generally from also a situational perspective, that there are times when you need interventions. People have to be ready to go someplace and intervene at some level, and when there's a situation that's emerging on this. Say, for example, there's warm weather coming up. We know that I think the police would say the highest crime rate day in the year is Memorial Day weekend time. So we should expect to see some problems. So some kind of intervention team should be out there that includes people who have some relationship to the kids on the streets. Okay, I did 4 years at the inside suspension room at Quirk Middle School, and they had a lot of school psychologists coming in and out, and principals with doctorates and a whole bunch of stuff. But my friend Michelle Jernigan, who just graduated from high school, she had more control over those kids in a more meaningful way as she watched them as their custodian, basically, than the experts did. So she could say, I know your mother, and you can't behave like this in front of me because I'll tell your mother.
Right.
That works, you know.
Right.
So you find people in the community who can do those things, and building a multi-generational cadre of people who can do that, starting off with the leaders in elementary school and looking for the kids in middle schools and in high school, people in the community who may not be officially, you know, endowed with some kind of power, have moral power in the community. Is an important thing.
Right. It sounds like I'm seeing a thread in between the conversations that everyone has expounded on today, which talks about, you know, we are who we are waiting for, essentially. Right. It starts with us. Attorney Jennings, were you saying?
Yes. I wanted to just bring up the fact that when we talk about how this whole COVID-19 affects and impacts our youth, this is traumatizing to our youth. They see no matter what you do, Black people are dying. They're putting body bags in refrigerator trucks. And this is, I mean, out by St. Francis Hospital, they have these big white tents out there. And the rumor was that it was an outside morgue right there on Collins Street. And I heard it's not. But the bottom line is, what are the rumors out there? And I can tell you that because of the trauma that our children have already faced, we have to take a look at what's happening. I remember one time, and I'll use Pat as an example, Pat Kelly, because I was visiting the Ebony Horsewoman facility when I was on council, and I saw 20 to 30 microscopes in there, and I said, Pat, what are these microscopes for? And she said, our children have been exposed to a lot of trauma. And we had a big horse, you know, these are big animals, and one of them just dropped dead one night. And they were doing autopsies on the animals to find out what killed these animals, because most of the children had never seen natural causes of death. They've seen shootings and they've seen other traumas. And now, once again, they're being traumatized with this COVID-19. What about looking at having our children do some research on what's causing this disease, what they can do what is your immune system? How does your immune system protect you from this disease? What did the grandparents and the older generation that have now almost all passed on, what did they do to protect us from parasites, from worms, from things that could kill us inside our body? I've seen my grandmother give us what was called a washout every season. She would give us something like a laxative, castor oil, cod liver oil. She would make you take that stuff, and you would see the worms come out of your body. Why does that not work for COVID? COVID is a killer. Why would we keep it in our body and try and fight it inside? Why wouldn't we get it out of our body? And the question also is, what can these children do to make sure that their parents don't pick up something from them? If they thought that they were bringing a disease home that would kill their parents and their grandparents, there's no way they wouldn't wear their masks and they wouldn't protect themselves. But they don't even see right now the relevance of their actions and how it could harm someone close to them that they love. So we've got to come up with ways to de-traumatize our children and put them in control of some of these things. Make them understand what your immune system does. Make them understand what this virus does. If they're not in school, hold some workshops or something online like we're doing now, and let them know what they can do to protect themselves. I mean, even if it's as simple as they know that the disease, they brought it on TV. They said the disease is subject, you know, it responds to heat, and it responds to definitely to heat. And so why wouldn't we try and get heat into our body or steam our body? They said heat and moisture. And so why wouldn't we try and steam our faces and things and make sure that our hands are clean, but make sure that our lungs are cleared out as well? Why wouldn't we talk about exercising our lungs and what to take, what to eat in order to strengthen ourselves? And these things are things they need to do anyway, because that we live in such a toxic environment. But our personal environment, about what they're saying about us on TV, our children are watching this. We need to come up with some way that the children can get involved in making sure that they can contribute to the health of themselves and their parents, and maybe have naturopathic physicians talk to them. This has only been the medical system talking. We haven't talked to naturopathic physicians and asked them, what can we do to protect ourselves from this virus? So I think we need to engage, and we need to expose our children to the economic side of what it means to go and become a naturopathic physician, what it means to protect your immune system, what it means to protect your parents, and what you have to do in order to do that.
Yep. Wonderful. I mean, I think, again, this thread that I'm hearing is we are who we're waiting for. We have the solutions, we have the guidelines, we have recommendations. We all need to, those who are interested need to get and have a voice and want to have a voice in this issue, need to come to a table. Maybe we make our own table. We build our own table and we stop waiting to get invited to everybody else's table and we start doing this work. Dr. Cezar-Martínez, one of the things that Attorney Jennings mentioned, she talked about economics, she talked about food, she talked about food quality, and she talked about parents, right? And so we know that essential workers who don't have the privilege of staying at home and getting their glow up together during COVID, who have to go out every day to make sure that the groceries are being delivered, that workers, that the food at food plants are being processed, that truckfuls of meat that we all, some of us eat and purchase are being transported. Those essential workers, those frontline workers, even in the nursing facilities, the hospitals. In Hartford, we have a very large population of West Indian, primarily women, who are the CNAs, the skilled nursing facilities. Those are Black and brown people, primarily. Those include about a million farm workers who are responsible for the front end of our food supply. Attorney Jennings was talking about, kids don't really understand how death happens if it's not on the other end of a firearm or some kind of violent act. They also, many don't understand where food comes from. That food is grown, that food is picked. A lot of the folks who are picking the food, who grow the food, who process the food are Hispanics. And then to a lesser extent, Black. Can you talk a little bit about how this COVID is impacting our food system, how it is impacting the food supply chain? And also, these are workers who have families at home. They're going to work in deplorable conditions. They're risking their lives every day. So the rest of us have certain things, supplies, amenities, food, you name it, groceries when we go to the grocery store, but they still themselves have to go home to families who may be worried about what's happening to their parents when they're on their jobs. So I know that's a lot, there's a lot packed in there, but I know that you have expertise with respect to animals, with respect to food, and I know you care deeply about youth and their health statuses. But so is there anything you can unpack for us with respect to how this is affecting Black and brown communities through the food system, food supply chain, and then also on the backs of our essential workers?
So yes, definitely. It's interesting how there is a camaraderie of essential workers out there. And there seems to be also different categories of essential workers that actually our country does not realize who is really an important part of being essential workers, such as those that are on the farms or actually in the slaughter plants, that is there to process our meats there, and that it's really important. There's a very, very large percentage of Latinos and Black people that are working in the plants. And what's been very interesting is that a lot of these plants have closed because many people have become positive in the plants because they're shoulder to shoulder working. And yes, there is a concern about having enough PPE for people to be in the hospitals, to be there, being a nurse and so forth, but then that PPE is not actually being provided so much to those that need to have it in the slaughter plants. And that's been a really issue that we've been dealing with, because these slaughter plants now having people that have come up positive to corona, now the plants are being closed. We have almost 100 or so closed at this time. And so that's really impacting not just the people that work there and their families, but also the animals, because we're not able to get them processed. So they're getting actually put down directly at their farms and not able to be utilized for our food at all. They actually are having to be incinerated directly, which is really bad because all of this food that we're creating in our country can't be utilized for us to eat. And so there's many people that is not able to do that. And actually, because there's been a concern about getting the required safety, the mask, the gloves, things that are need to be done in the slaughter plants, there has been a concern about having individuals to ban eating meat, because they're like, well, we're not getting the equipment we need. Maybe we shouldn't be eating any meat, which that's another effect that shouldn't be happening. So it's been really hard on those aspects of actually and explaining, you know, the importance of ensuring everyone is safe. All essential workers are safe and provided the equipment they need. So we've been really, with USDA, US Department of Agriculture, we've been really trying to work very closely with those plants to try to get them the proper equipment they need to have individuals to continue working there, because we were advised that we are essential workers, and there was an executive order passed recently saying that we have to keep those plants open. So we're really, really trying to work with those plants to make sure they're secured, and ensuring that also those farmers that are having to keep their animals with them and not get them processed, either having them to help them with the euthanasia of those animals, or ensuring that they can continue to keep them until the plants are open again. But it's definitely been a challenge, and it's been all of us having to work together. And yes, as others have explained, it's so important to explain this to children, and so they can understand that chicken that they get at Popeyes, you know, it was a chicken before, you know, and that's where every time I'm telling kids about animals, and I was like, it's from farm to fork. Like that Popeye's chicken didn't just show up. And I was like, that was a live chicken in one case. And I'm like, and this is how it was raised. So that's really important to make sure people can see that and understand that. And that's a very important portion of having essential be a part of our life. And that's where, and then also too, for people to understand, those are careers that are possible, that you'll realize that you're going to always be needed to be out there. So,
right.
So that's just a really big challenge that we're having right now with the food supply and so forth. So.
Yeah, and it's scary also because, you know, we also see these lines, miles long lines of people going to food banks. So you have so many kids who live at or below the poverty line anyway, who are food insecure. And now we've also got disruptions in the food chain to where even, you know, chicken that has been relatively inexpensive to get, now we've got issues in terms of, can those chickens, can the burgers, can all that stuff even be processed? So how do we, you know, how is the disruption in the supply chain from the, you know, plant location on down affect people who are already food insecure?
Yeah, so, and that's the really big issue as well, because you don't, especially with the food being so much in need now, and the plants not being open, the meat is higher price, extremely high price, and it doesn't even actually affect just meat. It's also plants too. All the vegetables and everything that goes into our grocery, they also have to be inspected and looked at by the staff that's in those facilities as well. So that's, and they work very closely with each other. So it doesn't just affect the meat, it's also vegetables too. So, and that's where it's like, you always, there's a concern about, you know, if we are to let regulations lean like a little bit and not have them so much, and allow food to go out and not have as much as the inspection being done, and having them go to food pantries and so forth. That was a concern, because then you're putting those people at risk of possibly getting E. coli and salmonella, and that's not a good thing to be doing at all. But that's where there's been an issue about that. They're like, well, let's at least give the food then to food pantries and so forth. But you're like, well, no, we can't do that, because then we're putting them at risk too. So there is a big challenge about doing that. And I believe I had read about in Connecticut, they are looking at trying to see how they can support more of the food pantries in those areas, because there is such a minimize of meat being processed.
Yeah, and I would agree. I'm sorry, I kept talking about meat, but you're right. Even myself going into grocery stores and so forth, you see that the price of eggs is sky high. And there's actually been news reports about, price gouging around eggs. And then you go into the produce section and there's very little produce. And, if I could, I'll just take a moderator's license and do a plug for gardening. Everybody, I don't care if you're in an apartment, I don't care if you have a big piece of land or a little patch, you find yourself a pot and go to Home Depot, Lowe's, a nursery, where have you, and get some pepper plants and some lettuce plants or what have you. But container gardening is very efficient. You can grow a lot of your own food, and a little bit of effort and a little bit of money goes a long way. And I think that this is a nudge toward us as communities, Black and Brown communities, learning how to be a little bit more self-sustaining and not always relying on outside communities to, grocery stores and all these outside processes, systems to feed us and our families. Ms. Denby, are you still with us? I see your name, but I don't see your picture.
I am here. I'm here. Yeah, I had to sneak on the phone, but yes, I'm here.
I saved you for last because I knew that everything that everyone had to say would sort of, in my mind, I'm seeing a graphic of all these sort of lines going into this huge circle, and in the middle of the circle is this one word, and that is trauma.
Absolutely.
Trauma.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, we've talked about a lot. We've talked about food insecurity. We've talked about environmental justice issues where youth are breathing unclean air. They don't have, in some areas, full access to clean water. We didn't talk about it, but I mentioned it, green space, adequate green space. Throughout the country, people are talking about, oh, the parks are open, oh, that this is open. Well, a lot of kids in inner cities, particularly Hartford, don't have a whole heck of a lot of green space to expand, their lives into. We talked about being stigmatized as a Black and brown boy. You can't be safe. You're being summoned and getting tickets for not wearing face coverings. But then if you do wear face covering, then all of a sudden that institutional racism, that stigma comes in, and now you're a threat, right? We also talking about higher aspects of asthma and other comorbidities that make kids, all of us, even further at risk for COVID. And summer is coming, right? And so we know that life as we knew it has been suspended, will be suspended. There are a lot of kids who, because their parents are essential workers, or their parents have been laid off. 33 million Americans have filed for unemployment in the last, month and a half. We know we're headed for a recession. So you've got kids who are in their mind looking forward to summer employment. It's something that they do every year through different state organizations. They look for, and now how is that going to look? Are they going to be able to contribute to their families monetarily? Are they going to have that opportunity to go out and earn money? All of this sounds like layers and layers and layers and layers of trauma. And we talked last time about there is no such thing as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Our kids are currently traumatized. It is a moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day. Winston Churchill has a saying that says, if you are going through hell, keep going. How do we talk to our kids about keeping going? What is the way forward, knowing this environment, this cloud of trauma that is covering them all and that is magnified by COVID-19? We've got to see some light. We've got to learn, we've got to be the ones to lead them beyond this. How do we start on having these conversations, unpacking some of these feelings? How do we talk to them about coping with what's going on?
Ooh, well, thank you, panelists, for sharing it. In my head, just like you, Heather, I was going like, oh my God, another layer. You're right, with this whole COVID pandemic, how it's impacting our kids so many different ways. We do know that our children, Black and brown children in particular, if they're not able to express, then it may manifest in other behaviors in which, you know, the schools will label them, society will label them as problematic behavioral because they're not allowed to express. So as parents, as treatment providers, as family, friends, leaders, organizations, we need to encourage them to talk, allow them to share what they're feeling. You know, as a parent, I mean, my kids aren't little anymore, but as a parent, we sometimes forget to ask our kids, what are they feeling? Because we're worried, we're carrying the burden. So the essential workers who have to work 16-hour days or 20-hour days or whatever it may be, they come home, they're tired, they don't want to hear it, but they have to be able to say to their kids, how are you doing? Like, talk to me. We have to establish or foster that communication with anyone involved in the child's life in order to make sure that the child is doing okay. Just even asking, like, what are you thinking about what you're seeing on TV? Just getting their perspective, because if they're not heard, it's internalized. We don't know what their thoughts are or how they're feeling about it. If they're worried about the death of a family member or, you know, someone close to them, which is so common right now, another traumatic event, especially if they're in areas in their own homes where there may be a significant amount of trauma. They don't have an outlet. So we have to create the outlets. And you're right, summer is coming, and where are our kids gonna go? I'm asking people who are in legislation to really look at pushing to open programs for the summer for these children for several factors. One, they need that safety net. They need the socialization. They need to be able to breathe and to express and to have some kind of structure. Because if we're staying indoors like this now into the summer, it's going to be disastrous. Our kids are going to lose a sense of who they are. Depression is a big thing. The anxiety is another piece. Some acting out behaviors. I mean, we can see that every day, but it's going to probably triple in numbers that we can't even figure out. And they're going to need those supports. If it means that the state has to come up with funding to help programs such as yours, Mrs. Kelly, that does a wonderful job having the kids involved in nature, being able to be around the animals, hiring extra staff to be there and having smaller groups of children so that we're protecting the children as well as them having that ability to socialize. That's crucial. We're humans, basic needs. It hurts me that I can't hug either one of my kids. We're all essential employees. My mom, I'm here cooking at her house. She's in the back, I'm in the front. But when it's time for me to go in the back to check the stove, she gotta go. That basic need, just to have a hug or a kiss or whatever it may be, it's not happening. So if we can even look at our politicians and those individuals that are out there, our leaders, and say, hey, let's open up the camps. I just had this conversation with one of my colleagues yesterday. Our kids need to be outside. It is not healthy. I know how I feel if I don't go drive for 5 minutes after being cooped up in an office for 7 hours, 8 hours, sitting in front of a computer. So we gotta at least let them have some normalcy But again, educating them on the, you know, protecting themselves, protecting each other. And kids are so, they're like sponges, they learn. You know, you practice these safe things. We don't want you to get sick. We don't want Nana to get sick. We don't want mommy or daddy to get sick. So make sure you wash your hands before and after when you come outside. You know, you can't eat from other people. Don't share, you know, that kind of thing. It's doable. We just have to make sure we have resources to support that. And like I said, my thing is pushing the programs, the powers that be, to put money into these programs so that they can open and give our kids an outlet, some energy, some way to burn up their energy, and to have someone that they can talk to. Because if they're at home and things are going wrong in home, who are they going to turn to? And that's going to be another problem on top of everything else. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I think you hit on a lot of really important points, including funding. I know that there's trillions of dollars going out through the CARES Act. We need to ask some really important questions about where that money is going and how is it going to benefit the communities that need it most. You also hit on, and I think Attorney Jennings had mentioned it earlier, and I see Dr. Rhule shaking his head when you talk about depression. You know, depression is very real. What a lot of people don't know is that studies are finding that depression and anxiety are people thought that they kind of go hand in hand. What researchers are finding is that they're really like two sides of the same mental health disorder. So kids who have depression also have anxiety, and then depression is a risk factor for suicide. Suicide is the #1 killer of youth ages 17 to 24. Okay, so a lot of times when we think about our kids, we often think about, you know, violence going outwards. We don't often hone in, and this is a part of, for girls, the adultification of girls, and even the stereotypes that we hold ourselves for our boys. But we don't think about self-harm. We think about, you know, the violence that goes out from them, but our kids are also at risk for harming themselves, and suicide, again, is one of those main risk factors of depression. You know, Mrs. Kelly, you deal with horses, obviously. Horses are fight or flight animals, right? So when they are pent up against the wall, so to speak, an aggressor, so to speak, they will either run or they will rear up and fight. A lot of times our kids who don't get the opportunity to, as Ms. Denby said, express themselves, they internalize a lot of this stuff and they become fight or flight animals as well. Their trauma is expressed in a lot of harmful ways, outwardly and to themselves, because they don't have that release valve. They don't have that escape. They don't have the opportunity to feel that they are in a safe space and to emote in a way that does not decrease their status in their social groups. Dr. DiChiara can talk to us about the hierarchies of maleness in these groups and how important it is to maintain a certain status. Our guys don't get that. Our kids don't get that. Can you talk to us about sort of what your program offers in terms of allowing for that release valve, in terms of allowing for the internalized trauma to be let out in a way that is constructive, in a way that is helpful? And also at the end of that, if you could talk to us about what is your summer programming going to look like as we're looking for kids to go back out into the community. What opportunities will there be at the Ebony Horsewomen Incorporated Agricultural and Equestrian Center?
Okay, thank you. There's also a third element to depression and anxiety. So we talked about either running or fighting, and that's the response with horses. Kids have a lot more dimensions than that. I've seen some of the outwardly most friendly, seemingly happy kids cut themselves regularly. You would not know by the outward appearance that there's a lot going on, but they are self-mutilating. Mm-hmm. So there are more dimensions than you see, which is why equine assisted therapy, what we've been using for the last 35 years, is so helpful because they either can't articulate exactly what's going on in them, they won't articulate, they're fearful of articulating, but nevertheless, like Roxanne said, it's got to come out some way. Because if it doesn't come out, it's going to be internalized. And then the signals to what's happening is not always visible until something drastically happens, until there's an attempt to suicide. So what's happening, I think, with our kids is that isolation is probably one of the worst things that you can do to an urban child facing all of the environmental, criminal, social, racism issues that happen within their community. Now they're isolated. So there's no escaping. There's no fright and flight. You are there. And if you happen to be in a situation where a lot of this stuff is happening in your home, you are a trapped animal. You are trapped in this. So what we're going to see this summer is going to be interesting. And I can't articulate exactly what it is, but they have to have a way to express this. One of the things that's worked for us over the years is the fact that kids can get outside. They can rip, run, scream, holler, fall down, get up, and keep it moving and begin to release some of this anxiety that they have in them. The horses help tremendously to bring out stuff. If you want to see a teacher in progress, you see a horse with a male ego and how that horse, and I see Dr. Martinez laughing, you watch a horse teach a young man how to behave all the time. You don't have to, you just let that horse do the work. So this summer, you know, it's going to be interesting what we're going to see. But with Ebony Horsewomen, fortunately, we have some things in place that are going to help. We haven't figured it all out yet because, again, we need the government to kind of give us some more instructions. But we have a large campus. And then, of course, we're in 693 acres. We've got 5 buildings on the premises. So we have the ability to take in a certain amount of children, safely distance them, and give them all of the nature and the animal experiences that they're going to need for the summer. But again, we're still working out the process. But as Roxanne said, it is going to be interesting at the very least to see how this stuff manifests. And then, because the state says we can't do anything until after June 29th, that gives us about 4 weeks before they're back into an educational process again. So I don't even know if that's enough time to decompress with these children, then to throw them back in. And then, of course, Dr. Rhule, if we get a second wave of this corona and they have to back us up again, the second isolation is going to be much more traumatic than the first one.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot for us to continue talking about. I look forward to us having more of these conversations, and I thank you all for your participation today, specifically for the mothers who came on during this sacred day, our queens who should be celebrated. Thank you for taking your time out to, as the mothers you are, mothering the rest of the greater Hartford community in terms of trying to have these discussions for the benefit of our young people. We truly, truly appreciate you. Dr. Rhule, I really would love it if you could once again give that telephone number for testing, where to get a test, how to, and a few of the parameters around getting one. You said they were free. You mentioned a few locations. Could you tell us that again for anybody who joined us late, just to make sure that that information is shared?
Yes, thanks. The phone number is 860-757-9311. So like 311. So 860-757-9311. It's the Hartford number. You'd call, you can get a ride. They'll actually ask you about accommodations, about how to get the ride. It's completely free. Whether you're uninsured or insured, it doesn't matter. Once you get to the testing site, that is. And it's also for documented and undocumented persons. So if you don't not document it, it doesn't matter. Call the number, get the ride, get your test done.
Great, wonderful. And Ms. Denby, do you have any mental health resources that you want to share? Is there a mental health hotline or information, the name of an organization that you'd like to share information for?
Actually, it's funny you're talking about that. My organization, the Black Social Workers, we are actually working with the NAACP to get some resources together, but there are plenty of, I always say go to 211, depending on where you live, to request, to find out what's available. But community organizations that are out there, my agency, A Mind's Journey, we have a diverse group of clinicians that work with us. We have Mrs. Kelly, and we also work with Mrs. Kelly, some of my clinicians, myself included, at Ebony Horsewomen, My People's Clinical Services, and then some of the local ones that have been around, the Charter Oaks and Capital Region Mental Health Center, which is a lead mental health agency, and they do accept undocumented individuals or uninsured individuals. I believe that the young adult program would be the individuals that are like DCF. They're under DCF, but they're within the age range of 16 and 20. I think it's 26 or 27. So there are agencies out there, but 211 can also be an asset for individuals to look up resources. And what I'll do, Heather, once we finish compiling, because we were just tasked to do this, to list like providers within the community. Hartford Behavioral Health is another one. They're on Main Street. I'm looking at like within the North End kind of area. I will definitely get a list that I could send, and that way we could share it. But providers are out there, and we're all equipped to do telehealth support until we can get back in and being able to see our individuals, because that is crucial. I hate really talking to people via telephone or video conference, and I like to see, I'm a people person, so I like to be in somebody's face. So it's even rough on me as a treater, but this is the way it is right now. But at least if someone just needs to vent or just needs some support, we're available.
Right.
My direct number, if people are looking for support, I can be reached at 860-328-1515. If they are looking for support, and then I can assign them to one of our staff at A Mind's Journey.
Wonderful.
Let me just add one other thing. About Roxanne's group. Her firm is the only African-American Latino psychotherapy firm in the nation that does equine assisted therapy in the United States, in the nation. So we are very happy and blessed to have her firm working with our families, children, veterans, and adults with equine assisted therapy.
Wonderful. Councilwoman Bermudez, did you have any resources that you wanted to share? City Council?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I wanted to mention, we have a website that we put together. It's Wiz, W-I-Z, and Josh.org. So wizandjosh.org, where we've listed different types of support numbers and also website links. So some of the items, for instance, we get asked a lot, what can I do? Where can I get some food? And so we have the website for food share, direct links there. We also have information for Hartford Mutual Aid. So Hartford Mutual Aid is a support group for people who can't necessarily go to the food share locations because of a variety of reasons, whether it's lack of transportation or they're immunocompromised. And so on that website, we put together a list of frequently asked questions and resources that the community has been reaching out to us with in reference to those residents who are in the greater Hartford area. And we've also put on there phone numbers that are useful too, like, you know, if you need assistance with your utilities, energy assistance, and other things that have been they're in the works through the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. So different numbers.
Great. Was that AND, Wiz, AND, or the and sign? Wiz and sign?
AND,
Okay.
AND, yeah. Wiz and AND, Josh.org.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Attorney Jennings, did you have any resources that you wanted to share or any last words?
Actually, I don't have any resources, but I would ask that that anyone who's interested in the environmental racism and environmental justice issues, that they contact the State of Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, DEEP, and ask for the Environmental Justice Division or the Environmental Justice Unit. I know Edith Pastana is in charge of the unit that has to do with environmental justice. And she has been tremendously helpful in getting the agencies to relate to the individuals. I think that it's also important that you contact the person who's in charge of the environmental committee. I don't know, Wildaliz, who's in charge of the environmental committee at the council now, but you contact the environmental committee and get involved in the task force meetings that are currently taking place on whether or not they should site an another incinerator in Hartford or not. These are things we should be present at and involved in. I mean, we've even had questions about where we had to fight one issue when I was on the environment committee, and that was whether or not the governor would be allowed to bring a gas pipeline through our water reservoir. That was a big issue. But we're the major consumers of the water in this area. We have to protect our water supply, and we fought it, and it was off the table. But now the new governor is talking about perhaps doing some gas pipelines through through Connecticut, and that means through our water supply oftentimes. So pay attention to what's going on and what they're talking about, because generally it's going to end up impacting the people who live in the community and live in the urban areas.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. DiChiara, did you have any last words or any resources that you wanted to share?
I cannot add anything except I'll say the university will be open in the fall. Come on by and visit me sometime.
Outstanding. We'll do that. And Dr. Rachel, hi. Did you have anything that you wanted to share or any resources or last words?
Yes, so I wanted to make sure that others knew that I've been very inspired by Miss Kelly and the Ebony Horsewoman Incorporation. So I've been trying to establish something of that nature in the DC area, or DC, Maryland, Virginia area. I do have a farm in Southern Maryland that we just recently received our business license for, to have people come and ride horses, as well as to be able to come and see and learn about farm animals. So we have a Facebook page. It's Z Cowboy Corral. I'm hoping to open up weekend camps eventually. However, we definitely are going to be looking at ways that we can have kids come and learn about animals, because I think it's a really important aspect, and just getting people to be outside and coming to hang out. So Heather, I look forward to you coming out here soon. Absolutely. Since you're in DC.
Absolutely, I look forward to it. Once again, you all, on behalf of the Ebony Horsewoman Incorporated and the Board of Directors for the Ebony Horsewoman, we thank you for being a part of this super important, critical conversation. We look forward to having more dialogue with you all. Please feel free to share this link with your contacts and friends, and still submit questions. We look forward to hearing from you guys so we know what topics that we should discuss going forward. Thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be safe, stay sane, stay home until it's time. And we'll see you again soon. Take care.
And happy Mother's
Thank
Day.
you.
Yes,
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Bye
Thank you,
now.
Heather.
Bye.
Wow.